a beloved comedy legend, preyed on underage girls. America's favorite crooner beat his children with leather belts, and one thoughtless fan's selfish act destroyed a movie star's life forever. But here's the part that'll haunt you. Some of these monsters are still celebrated as America's sweethearts, and the victims, most of them took these secrets to their graves. The price of being perfect. Before we dive into these nightmare stories, you need to understand what Hollywood's golden age really demanded from its stars. It wasn't just talent or beauty. It was the complete surrender of your authentic self. Studios didn't just control careers. They controlled marriages, friendships, and family relationships. Stars signed contracts that gave executives power over every aspect of their private lives. Want to visit your real parents? Better ask permission first. The pressure to maintain perfect public images created psychological breaking points that manifested in the most horrific ways. Some stars took out their rage on the people closest to them. Others lived such elaborate lies that they lost track of reality entirely. And the children of these stars, they became collateral damage in Hollywood's war between public perfection and private truth. What you're about to hear proves that fame doesn't just corrupt. Sometimes it creates monsters. Bing Crosby, the crooner who beat Christmas spirit out of his kids. To millions of Americans, Bing Crosby was the perfect father figure. His warm voice crooning White Christmas made him the soundtrack to American family life. His holiday specials painted him as the ideal dad, surrounded by loving children and Christmas cheer. But in 1983, his son Gary published Going My Own Way and revealed a truth so horrifying it destroyed Crosby's wholesome legacy forever. Bing Crosby was allegedly a monster who beat his sons with leather belts and enforced rules so brutal they bordered on torture. Gary described weekly weigh-ins where Crosby would strip his sons naked and humiliate them if they'd gained weight. He installed a gym in their home and forced them through military-style workouts as punishment for minor infractions. The psychological abuse was even worse. Crosby would disappear for weeks without explanation, then return and rage at his children for imagined failures. He called them worthless, told them they'd never amount to anything. Two of Gary's brothers, Philip and Dennis, confirmed the abuse. The trauma was so severe that a third brother, Lindsay, eventually took his own life, unable to escape the damage their father had inflicted. But here's the part that'll make you sick. Crosby's second family, with his much younger wife, described a completely different man. Warm, involved, loving. This proves he was capable of being a good father. He just chose not to be one when his first four sons needed him most. Think about that the next time you hear White Christmas. The man singing about family togetherness was allegedly terrorizing his own children behind closed doors. Judy Garland, the secret that haunted Dorothy. Judy Garland's innocent portrayal of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz made her America's eternal sweetheart. But her real childhood was marked by a family secret, so dark that studios buried it so completely. Most people still don't know the truth. Born Frances Gumm in 1922, Judy's family suddenly fled their hometown of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, when she was just 4 years old. The official story? They were moving to California for better show business opportunities. The truth was far more sinister. Her father, Frank Gumm, was reportedly gay in an era when that could land you in prison. But it gets much worse. Frank had been having inappropriate encounters with young men in their small town. When rumors started spreading, the family had to escape before the scandal destroyed them. Judy was never told the real reason for their desperate midnight departure. She grew up believing the Hollywood fairy tale while her parents' marriage crumbled under the weight of Frank's secret life and the constant terror of exposure. Frank's relationship with Judy was poisoned by his hidden identity and paranoid fear of discovery. He was distant, cold, always looking over his shoulder for the scandal that might catch up with them. When he died suddenly at 49, with Judy just 13, he took all his secrets to his grave, but the damage was done. This early experience with devastating family secrets shaped Judy's entire approach to life. She learned that the people you love most are living lies, that safety is always temporary, that happiness is just a performance you put on to survive. She spent her entire career presenting a cheerful exterior while privately battling the pain and insecurity that had been planted in childhood. The pills that eventually killed her weren't just about fame's pressure. They were about escaping the bone-deep knowledge that nothing in her life was what it seemed. Patty Duke, the son with 3 possible fathers. Academy Award-winning actress Patty Duke created one of Hollywood's most bizarre and heartbreaking paternity mysteries. and the confusion would torture her family for decades. At just 23, Duke became pregnant during a period of extreme personal chaos when she was romantically involved with 3 different men in rapid succession. First, she dated teen heartthrob Desi Arnaz Jr., son of Lucille Ball, but Lucy Ball herself intervened, demanding the relationship end because of the age difference. Duke then got involved with married actor John Astin while he was separated from his wife. But in the middle of this chaos, something truly insane happened. She impulsively married Michael Tell, a complete stranger who was subletting her apartment. The marriage lasted exactly 13 days before being annulled. Duke later described it as a manic episode related to her undiagnosed bipolar disorder. But the timing of that 13-day marriage coincided perfectly with her pregnancy. When son Sean was born in 1971, Duke publicly named John Astin as the father. Astin divorced his wife, married Duke, and raised Sean as his own son for years. Sean Astin grew up believing John was his biological father. Then during his teenage years, Duke dropped a bombshell. She told Sean she actually thought Desi Arnaz Jr. was his real father. Imagine being a teenager and having your mother tell you that everything you believed about your identity was wrong. Sean struggled with profound confusion about who he really was. The mystery wasn't solved until DNA testing in the late 1990s revealed that Michael Tell, the man Duke had married for less than 2 weeks during a mental health crisis, was indeed Sean's biological father. Sean Astin, who became famous for The Goonies and Lord of the Rings, grew up with an identity crisis that influenced his entire life. Despite the biological truth, he declared that John Astin would always be his real father. Sometimes love matters more than genetics, but imagine the psychological damage of growing up, never knowing which man was actually your father. Gene Tierney, the fan who destroyed everything. Gene Tierney was one of Hollywood's most elegant stars, famous for her haunting beauty in films like Laura and Heaven Can Wait. Behind her glamorous image lay a family tragedy so heartbreaking, it drove her to the edge of madness. In 1943, while pregnant with her first child, Tierney attended a Hollywood charity event. An overeager fan approached her, gushing about how she'd broken quarantine specifically to meet her idol. The fan was infected with rubella. She didn't care. She was determined to meet Gene Tierney no matter what the consequences. As a direct result of that encounter, Tierney's daughter Daria was born with severe disabilities, deafness, partial blindness, developmental delays that would require lifelong care. Fearing public backlash and pity, Tierney and her husband made the agonizing decision to place Daria in an institution. The guilt and grief began destroying Tierney's mental health immediately. She started suffering from severe depression, unable to eat or sleep. The elegant star who had captivated audiences was reduced to sobbing in her dressing room between takes. But the story gets infinitely more devastating. Years later, at a tennis party, Tierney was approached by the same fan who had infected her. The woman cheerfully mentioned how she'd broken quarantine to meet Tierney all those years ago, completely oblivious to the catastrophic consequences of her selfish action. Tierney said nothing to the woman, but that encounter sent her into a psychological spiral, so severe she required hospitalization. She endured 27 electroshock treatments that destroyed significant portions of her memory, including precious moments with her other daughter. The treatments left her feeling brutalized and confused, but she never stopped fighting to recover. Her story became the inspiration for Agatha Christie's novel The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. But few people connected the fictional tragedy to Tierney's real-life nightmare. One thoughtless fan's moment of selfishness destroyed multiple lives and drove one of Hollywood's most talented actresses to the brink of insanity. Clara Bow, America's first sex symbol's horrific childhood. Clara Bow was the original It Girl, the 1920s sex symbol who defined an entire generation of liberated women. To the public, she embodied the carefree flapper lifestyle, all jazz-age freedom and sexual confidence. Studios had completely fabricated her background to hide a childhood so traumatic it would have destroyed her image instantly. Born in extreme poverty in Brooklyn in 1905, Clara endured abuse that would break most people before they reached adulthood. Her mother, Sarah, suffered from severe mental illness and violent psychotic episodes. During one particularly horrific incident, Sarah tried to kill Clara with a butcher knife while she slept, convinced that death was better than the life of sin her daughter was destined for. Clara woke up to find her own mother standing over her bed with a weapon, ready to murder her to save her soul. But the nightmare didn't end there. Clara later revealed that she had been sexually assaulted repeatedly by her own father, Robert. The man who was supposed to protect her instead became her predator. The studio publicity machine buried these devastating truths completely, crafting instead a false image of a fun-loving party girl who'd stumbled into stardom. Behind the scenes, Clara battled severe anxiety, chronic insomnia, and what we'd now recognize as PTSD. Her mental health steadily declined under the pressure of maintaining a persona that was the complete opposite of her traumatic reality. She retired at just 28, unable to continue living the lie that fame demanded. Despite her horrific past, Clara displayed remarkable kindness throughout her career. She personally answered hundreds of fan letters and sent gifts to young women struggling with their own problems. Even in retirement, she quietly helped local families in need, perhaps understanding better than most what real suffering looked like. Bobby Darin, the grandmother who stole his identity. Bobby Darin burst onto the music scene with hits like Splish Splash and Mac the Knife, presenting himself as a confident performer racing against time. What he didn't know was that his entire identity was built on a family conspiracy. Born Robert Casado in 1936, Bobby grew up believing Polly Casado was his mother and Nina was his older sister. He adored Polly, considering her the most important person in his life. The devastating truth? Nina was actually his biological mother, pregnant at just 17 out of wedlock. To avoid scandal in their Italian-American community, Polly claimed Bobby as her own child. Bobby discovered this earth-shattering secret in 1968 when Nina finally told him the truth. By then, he was 31, married to Sandra D., and had built his entire identity around the lie. The revelation destroyed his sense of self completely. Friends reported that Darin was never the same after learning he'd been living a complete fabrication. He'd idolized the woman he thought was his mother, only to discover that his real mother had been pretending to be his sister for 3 decades. But here's the tragic part that makes this story even more heartbreaking. Bobby was literally racing against time. Doctors had warned him since childhood that his heart, damaged by rheumatic fever, meant he probably wouldn't live past 30. This prognosis drove his relentless ambition and desperate need to achieve everything quickly. When he died in 1973 at 37 during routine heart surgery, he'd lived 7 years longer than predicted, but the family revelation had robbed him of precious time to process his true identity and build a relationship with his real mother. He spent his final years trying to understand the woman who'd sacrificed her identity as his mother to protect his future. Jerry Lewis, the charity king who abandoned his own daughter. For decades, Jerry Lewis was the face of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, raising millions for Jerry's Kids through his famous telethons. America saw him as a compassionate champion of sick children. But Susan Minaret claimed to be Lewis's daughter from a brief affair in the 1950s, and her story reveals one of Hollywood's most heartless contradictions. According to Minaret, her mother had a 3-year affair with Lewis starting in 1950, resulting in Susan's birth in 1952. Despite multiple attempts to contact him over the years, Lewis refused to meet her or take a paternity test during his lifetime. The cruelty was breathtaking. When Minaret reached out, hoping for some kind of relationship, Lewis's lawyers sent cease and desist letters. When she appeared at his comedy shows hoping to meet him, security physically removed her. He literally had his own alleged daughter treated like a dangerous stalker. DNA testing in 2009 showed an 88.7% likelihood that Lewis was Minaret's biological father, but he never acknowledged her, never provided support, never showed the slightest interest in her welfare. Here's the painful irony that'll make you sick. While Lewis spent decades raising money for sick children on television, his alleged biological daughter lived in poverty and suffered from Crohn's disease. The man who built his public image around compassion for suffering kids ignored his own possibly sick child for her entire life. Lewis's will excluded not just Susan, but his 6 sons from his first marriage as well. It reflected a pattern of private coldness that stood in stark contrast to his public persona as a champion of children. The individual who made millions crying on television about sick kids allegedly couldn't spare a moment of genuine compassion for his own family. Charlie Chaplin, the Little Tramp's dark appetites. Charlie Chaplin created the beloved Little Tramp character that made audiences worldwide laugh and cry. His genius for physical comedy and social commentary made him one of cinema's greatest artists. Off-screen, the comedy legend harbored disturbing secrets about his relationships with very young women that the studios worked desperately to downplay. In 1924, 35-year-old Chaplin became involved with 16-year-old actress Leda Gray, who'd been cast in his film The Gold Rush. When Gray became pregnant, Chaplin faced potential criminal charges under California's age of consent laws. The FBI opened a file on Chaplin titled Dangerous Moral Character. J. Edgar Hoover personally ordered surveillance, convinced that Chaplin's behavior with minors made him a threat to public morality. To avoid prosecution, Chaplin hastily arranged a private marriage in Mexico, but according to Gray's later divorce filings, he'd initially pressured her to undergo an illegal abortion. When she refused, the marriage was arranged primarily to avoid criminal consequences, not out of love. The marriage deteriorated rapidly. Gray alleged that Chaplin was controlling, demanding, and emotionally abusive. When she filed for divorce in 1927, her 50-page complaint detailed behavior that painted him as a predator who used his power to exploit vulnerable young women. This wasn't an isolated incident. Chaplin had a documented pattern of pursuing much younger women, often teenagers who were financially dependent on him for their careers. Throughout these scandals, studio publicity worked overtime to minimize the age differences and present Chaplin's relationships as romantic rather than potentially exploitative. The full extent of his behavior toward young women was downplayed in official biographies for decades, protecting the legacy of a comedy genius whose private appetites were anything but funny. When fame becomes poison, these stories reveal something terrifying about what fame and power can do to human beings. The pressure to maintain perfect public images created psychological breaking points that manifested in the most horrific ways. The statistics from this era are absolutely devastating. Child stars had astronomically high rates of mental illness, addiction, and suicide. Many never recovered from the trauma of growing up in families where love was conditional on maintaining lies. The real cost of Golden Age glamour. Here's what really happened during Hollywood's Golden Age. The industry didn't just manufacture stars. It manufactured human beings who were so disconnected from their authentic selves that they became capable of incredible cruelty toward the people who should have mattered most. The Golden Age wasn't golden for everyone. For some, it was the darkest chap.